The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Liberty. Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
It's getting closer by the day, the end of the pandemic. But as we approach that blessed time when we can truly say that COVID-19 is in the rearview mirror, still visible but ever more distant, it's time to consider what this nation will look like, where it will ultimately land after the pandemic has completed its path of destruction, how our society and our people have been changed by this plague upon the land for which we were all unprepared. Which of the often wrenching changes in politics, law, business, culture, media, and ultimately liberty will stay with us, and which will not? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com, and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. America After COVID, a discussion whose time has come, and we have brought in the big guns for comprehensive analysis in our B&B panel, the best and brightest, the triumvirate atop LibertyNation.com. Editor-in-Chief, Leesa K. Donner.
Hi, Tim.
Managing Editor Mark Angelides.
Also known as Pompey.
Okay, I'll take that. And Legal Affairs Editor and host of the Uprising podcast, Scott Cosenza.
Cheers.
Welcome all, and let's start with the radical change in the political direction of the country during the pandemic. Mark, as 2019 turned to 2020, the country was firing on all cylinders. Then came the pandemic, and everything fell apart. Just how significant a factor was the pandemic in the downfall of Donald Trump?
Well, Tim, without going too much off the rails and into speculation, I'd say that if it were not for the media coverage and the attacks against President Trump for his handling of the COVID situation and the COVID situation itself, we wouldn't have a President Joe Biden right now. Because you have to remember that Trump, he was looking at the evidence that COVID came from a lab leak, and he was roundly dismissed. He was derided and abused by the Fourth Estate, even having his social media platforms, they were censored, which certainly cut off his ability to talk to the public at a key time. But now that very same evidence that Donald Trump was looking at, whether it turns out to be credible or not, is now the same evidence that Joe Biden has asked for in a 90-day report. It's open season on this admittedly yet unproven theory. So I think that there wouldn't be a President Biden, there would still be a President Trump if the media handling of the COVID pandemic, not necessarily the pandemic itself, had been a little more balanced.
Leesa, the pandemic, the death of George Floyd, and the riots that followed will forever be linked together in the 2020 summer from hell. To what extent do you think the pandemic and the violence built upon each other?
Well, you know, it's been said often that the smile is an international language of, you know, pleasantness and joy and peace and happiness. And, you know, we masked every smile in America. We were cooped up. People were miserable. You know, our sons work in the service industry. The stories they would come home with, people fighting over toilet paper. You know, I had a man in a parking lot. I was waiting for my son to come out of work and pick him up, and the man knocked on my window and practically, I thought he was going to hit me because he said I was blocking something that I wasn't even blocking. Look, misery turns to anger. Anger turns to violence. And I think there is some connection there, without a doubt.
You have to add to the fact, too, that people are kicked out of their schools and workplaces. They got nowhere to go. And that seems to be the de rigueur sexy thing to do. That's sort of the cultural moment to have.
You really can see what a violent year this has been. And I'm sure when we look back on this period, we'll look at the deaths from despair, the suicides, the increase in violence all over the country, all over the world. In fact, it's happened here in the UK too. And people will say, well, was it to do with the racial reckoning that has been so touted in the media, or was it to do with the fact that we were all shut away from, as Leesa points out, the smiles or the physical contact, the human touch that is so necessary to us as a species? I think that will be the big legacy of COVID.
Okay, Scott, we've always talked about how leftists will use any crisis as an excuse to expand government power and justify the reduction of individual liberty. What do you consider the most egregious examples of liberty stolen during or since the pandemic?
I think there's three, Tim. I think the first one has to be, and this is just not talked about very much, but is the treatment of jailed people in America. These are not people in prisons who have been convicted of felony crimes, but people in jails who are accused of crimes and being held before trial. Many of those people died. So that's number one. Number two, and this is another sort of left field one I'm going to guess, is the debasement of the currency. By printing so much money, it's such a, to steal someone's money is an attack on their liberty. And so many Americans, especially the least of us, don't have IRAs or gold or securities or real estate investment, but they have a small cash investment. And when you debase the value of that currency by just printing money like you're a drunken sailor with the keys of the printing press, you destroy the people's liberty in that regard. And then the third one is the obvious choice, which is the mandated closures of the schools and businesses that made people paupers and deficient in so much. Mark mentioned earlier suicides. These sorts of results that come from this, it's going to be a decade or three before the full measure of these government actions kind of can be calculated with the mess they've made of people's lives.
The education aspect of that as well. It's a concern, but one that we've noticed that people are trying to solve now by the increase in homeschooling that we've seen over the period of the pandemic, which in my opinion is a fantastic thing. Homeschooling is it's the future. It was the past. It's not quite the present, but it is the future.
I'll only say that's because you haven't done it. Just kidding.
I'll second that emotion.
I used to be a teacher. I know what schools are like.
It's another one of those things. It's another one of those things where you hate the process, but you love the result.
Yeah.
For people who can manage it, the problem is that the people that the teachers' unions build up as their key constituency are the people that are least able to manage their resources in a way to shift things around. That's sort of the thing I think that's so perverse about what we're getting from the big box media on this. Those inner city kids that don't have good computer networks and don't have good internet connections and don't have parents at home that can teach them, they're the ones that are just ruined by this policy.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll take a quick break and then carry on with America After COVID as we examine changes to law and business which have altered the post-pandemic landscape.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com. With one click, you get tomorrow's news today with LNTV's Hot Topics and Analysis, Liberty Nation Radio, The Uprising and Rabbit Hole podcasts, and dozens of insightful original articles. And now, you can keep your kids ahead of the curve with LNGenZ.com. LN Gen Z brings a free-thinking education right into your home for students of every grade level with articles, videos, worksheets, and ready-to-go curriculum. While the media establishment giants are sleeping, you can stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com and get tomorrow's news today. LibertyNation.com.
We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
We are back discussing America after COVID with our B&B panel, the best and brightest from LibertyNation.com. Leesa K. Donner, Mark Angelides, and Scott Cosenza. The pandemic forced or enabled the passage of many new laws. And Scott, the most controversial of those laws related to the election and the liberal distribution of mail-in ballots. And some states have responded with stricter laws passed after the election, which are now the subject of protest. Where do you see election law landing after all the upheaval associated with the pandemic?
Well, I think it's going to be a while till we get our hands around it because the Supreme Court's going to have to weigh in at the end of the day on a lot of these restrictions. The state of the law is in flux, like you say, in many places. So I think that the way to view this is just a kind of war between two factions to decide who's going to get the spoils. The Democrats seem dead set on just expanding voting to the extent they possibly can in order to accrue more votes, and the Republicans are in a defensive position trying to limit it. We've got a Supreme Court now that looks like it's trending conservative, but it's on shaky ground, Tim. So whether they'll be allowing these rules in a way that will benefit the Republicans, or we see some on the court, like I'm suspecting perhaps Justice Roberts and maybe one other that are counted as conservatives would go the other way. So it's just going to be a wait and see, I think, at this point.
What about the Supreme Court? Are they likely to overturn Roe v. Wade?
Tim, the safe money bet on any Supreme Court prediction is that they will not vote to overturn a landmark ruling. Now, that doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means that the Supreme Court, both from the conservative and the liberal perspective, they tend to favor incremental change. So my bet is no, but it is a possibility. The way that they took the abortion case in question, the Mississippi abortion restriction, allows them within the context of that ruling to completely kind of overrule Roe, which is one of the reasons why on both sides people are very animated about this case. But at the same time, it's always I think it's always wise to think they'll do less rather than more, whether that's from a position of what you want to have happen or what you want to not have happen.
I think they're conservative in not wanting to change previous rulings. I mean, they've done it, of course, but they don't like doing it.
Correct.
Yeah, I think we never really have any major surprise. I can't remember the last time I was utterly shocked and surprised by a Supreme Court ruling. Disappointed, sometimes joyed, but I can never really remember when I was last shocked by a Supreme Court ruling. Okay,
Leesa, the breakdown of law and order during the pandemic in the wake of the George Floyd killing is a stuff of legend, the worst we've seen in more than 50 years. It perversely spawned the defund the police movement. Do you see the anti-police hysteria of this last year is likely to become a durable movement, or more a purely emotional or even staged reaction with little effect going forward?
All right, let's put two and two together and see if we can come up with four. So the pandemic happens and a couple of governors decide the best thing to do is to release some criminals out on the street. And then we couple that with defunding the police. And then we're shocked by a crime spike. And, that's all that once a week, every major network and cable news outlet is, crime in America is going way up. No kidding. I think poor people in urban areas will be hit the hardest and eventually will revolt against defunding the police. Ultimately, I think it will be a passing fad and people will look back on it and shake their heads. I really do.
Most of the polls actually show that especially in Black communities, 80% want the exact same or more police than they have already. I think the narrative of anti-police, defund the police, moving on to, of course, abolish the police, which is what's really behind defund the police. I think it's very much a political movement by people who would benefit from that, rather than actual people whose lives would be affected by a lack of police.
That's exactly what they've done to the disservice of the police. There's a window here where they could have gotten so much constructive change done that would have benefited those people. They do need more policing, but they need better policing. But that's been thrown, the idea of better policing has been thrown out the window. There are simple changes that could be made that nobody could disagree with, that they could have gotten through if they had some focused, simple demands, but they threw it all away. One of the main criticisms of protests, for instance, is that police officers cannot be identified. Okay, their identities are covered up. They need to be wearing numbers the size of football, or for you, American football, Mark, jerseys or something like that, so that we never have an instance in America where a police officer is mistreating someone and somebody who's observing that from a safe distance that they mandate, by the way, can't discern that police officer's identity. The more widespread use of body cameras and a clearly articulated and held to policy of when to release that information, it would be another thing. We could have, and I wish Donald Trump would have done this. There are many small police departments in the country, and I say small not to besmirch them, but it's just easier for, I think, if one person is a chief of police and he's got 3 cops, it's easier for him to be crooked than somebody who's in like a larger department with more eyes on them. But there are plenty of instances where police officers do violate the civil rights of people. You see it if you want to see it on YouTube every single day. You can watch a new video posted where a police officer violates someone's rights, whether it's by arresting them for recording or trespassing, even though they're on public property, for instance. And those people can be arrested and charged federally, meaning those police officers can be charged federally for violating the civil rights of the people. And I think if you had a dozen high-profile arrests of police officers who let's say, arrested people for filming on public property, which again happens all the time in violation of people's civil rights, that the cops would get the message, and it would be a few things like that I think, again, these are things I think most people can agree on, that they have to obey current civil rights law with respect to the citizenry. Let's just enforce it to the benefit of those policed.
Okay, so Mark, one of the things that changed perhaps more than anything during the pandemic was the way business was conducted. Companies were forced to have almost everyone work at home. Do you see that trend taking hold going forward, or more a return to business pre-pandemic?
Actually, I'll go against the common grain on this one, say no. Some people who work with computers will want to continue doing so, but I think that many, if not most professions, that there's something to be said for the workplace environment.
I think, Mark, you're wrong about that. When the leases come due and the rents are time to renew, I happen to know some employers who've heard from their employees who say, I'm just not willing to come back to work, meaning at any price. I'll just go find a job somewhere else where I can work from home because I like being around my dog and being able to take a nap, in the middle of the day, and the other comforts of home if you have a comfortable home.
Okay, thanks, panel. We'll break away for a moment, and then we'll continue our look at America after COVID as we examine how the culture changed and whether it will ever change back to the days before the pandemic.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, it is getting closer by the day, the end of the pandemic. But how many of the often wrenching changes in politics, law, business, culture, media, and ultimately liberty will stay with us and which will not? We're back with our B&B panel, the best and brightest from LibertyNation.com, Editor-in-Chief Leesa K. Donner, Managing Editor Mark Angelides, and last but not least, of course, Legal Affairs Editor and host of the Uprising podcast, Scott Cosenza. Welcome back, all. And Leesa, I think everyone will agree that the pandemic has left an indelible imprint on American culture. But in what ways do you think that imprint was most pronounced?
Well, you know what? I don't feel qualified to answer for the rest of America. I'm sure Scott does. But anyway, I just feel like for myself, what I saw were a number of my girlfriends who were empty nesters. Their kids came home from college. Family time. I mean, in our family, we brought back, let's all sit down on Sunday, listen to the service on the internet and play Scrabble. You know, I also learned that it's really easy to be selfish.
We also got deep into the movie archive.
Yes. But it's easy to be selfish. I mean, when there's only one more 4-pack of toilet paper on the shelf, do you leave it or do you go for it? You know, so that was something that I thought about. I also think that maybe we learned less is more, as my mother always used to say. There's plenty that we can do without. And number one, I think what Americans learned, especially younger Americans, I noticed, was that liberty is fragile.
Leesa, the idea that should we be kinder when the resources are cheap, that is or scarce, that's the story of the human race throughout history. And I think it's a lesson that we'll never quite learn, but it is one that we probably should.
You have to add the shelters were emptied of their dogs, by the way, the companion animals and that sort of thing. So the feathering of a nest in a way that, you know, is about staying home and making do in an old timey way is definitely there. I saw an article just this week that was talking about a butter shortage because so many more people are baking at home these days.
There's large and small things, you know, like from baking to Scrabble to, you know, I don't think most of my girlfriends, and I know I don't want to let go our family time, you know, our Scrabble game. I don't want to let go, you know, the time that we spend together. I think a lot of Americans, and we were just saying in the last segment, a lot of people don't want to waste the time sitting in their car, stuck in rush hour traffic when they could be getting more done. A friend of mine just told me her husband's an electrician. And electricians are expensive. And he was kicked out of a house yesterday because he wasn't vaccinated, even though he was wearing a mask.
Wow.
And was the lady vaccinated who kicked him out?
I assume so.
I think it's fun to us that Mark assumed it was a lady that did it.
And then why would she kick him out if she was vaccinated? Why bother to kick him out? Because she's not vulnerable anymore. So
I have the
that's
answer
more
to
like
that,
a
Tim.
Political statement.
I have the answer. It's confusion between what's happening at different levels of the government. For example, President Joe Biden said that if you're unvaccinated, you can still pass on the pass on COVID and infect those around you, and of course get yourself sick. Whereas just a month ago, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who heads up this whole thing, was saying that as of now, we actually don't know whether if you're vaccinated, you can still pass on the COVID or if you can still infect those around you. And of course, in Joe Biden's big interview after becoming president, he said about the lady in Florida who had a a vulnerable child with an immunity disorder. And she was crying tears of joy because she'd had the vaccine and she could go home. That was, according to the media standards, that was a dangerously irresponsible thing to do. Because according to Dr. Fauci, CDC, WHO, those who are vaccinated can still pass on the COVID. So I think a lot of the disparity here comes from this mixed messages from different levels of the government. It's crazy that they do not have a set thing. This is what you get. This is what you don't get. And they decry why is there so much vaccine hesitancy? It's because nobody's given the same answer twice.
Even after 1 year. Of course, it wasn't just the U.S., but the entire world that was brought low by the pandemic. How would you compare the devastation and the recovery from COVID in the U.S. to England, Europe, and Asia?
Well, I think the recoveries are pretty standard across, let's call them the Western nations. In Asia, the recovery's actually been very good in terms of how the economies are progressing. But speaking from a personal level in the UK and some other European countries that I'm familiar with, there's a hangover to be had. This is a drunken spree that demands a count at the end. And so the hangover due to come is that at some point we've all got to pay for this. Down the line, when the hangover comes due, it's either going to come, A, they're going to put up your taxes, in which case you have less money and you're worse off, or B, they're going to cut the services that you already pay for through taxation, in which case you're worse off and you're suffering for it. So I would say, Tim, to try and succinctly answer your question, is the world, America, Europe, Asia as well, and the UK, we're all about to wake up to a very, very bad hangover.
So, Scott, with the benefit of hindsight, how do you think the pandemic might have or should have been handled differently by then President Trump and the myriad governors forced to cope with the months-long crisis?
Well, I would say that the best thing that a government can do, and one of the things they can probably do better than most private sector enterprises, is collect and disseminate information. So the best information about the health of the pandemic could have been disseminated by the government. We could have had a CDC director or a surgeon general who used to be in charge of our kind of public health in the United States, who would appear on camera to
Dr.
kind of
Jill Biden, right?
What's that?
Dr. Jill Biden,
right? You've been watching The View again.
But we didn't have that. We were lied to about masks, to wear them and to not wear them on both sides, which just created, this distrust, which probably cost some Americans' lives. Also, the notion of this kind of contact transmission and asymptomatic transmission. They've known for a long time that asymptomatic transmission was basically a non-starter. And that's what really panicked so many Americans. They didn't know, they felt fine. But really, if they just said from the start, if you feel at all sniffly or at all under the weather, go mask up, stay inside, do that. That would have been both consistent with the science and not threaten the liberty of Americans. And for the governors, Tim, I would say that there are governors in the United States right now that, because of their being owned by the teachers' unions, are keeping kids out of school. With all we know, with the widespread availability of the vaccine and the fact that kids basically, by and large, don't get this disease, they are. I mean, I hate to be super judgy, but boy, I wouldn't want to be them on Judgment Day when we hear about all the dysfunction that's a result of them keeping kids out of school in the face of what we know is now an inconvenience for them rather than some kind of existential health problem.
But of course, 2 governors in California and Michigan are already subject to recall because of what they did during the pandemic.
Yeah, Gretchen Whitmer is there are 6 recall petitions against her. Did you hear about the recent arguments that she made? Her and her lieutenant governor were trying to argue that, well, the average person would not understand the word bar to mean a place where people hang out and get drinks.
Yes.
Well, but this is the way liberals talk. I mean, the president just said that Black people cannot get attorneys and they can't get accountants.
Yeah, but his heart's in the right place, so he can just say whatever he wants. Yes. He never has to.
Hang on. Is this the same president that also said that Black people can't use computers to access information? I believe that's the same president.
That would be
right?
Yes, that would be the same person. Yes. Okay, thanks again, panel. We'll take a quick break and then come back and conclude our panel discussion, America After COVID, with how the media reported on the pandemic and whether their coverage helped or hurt their credibility.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And we are back discussing America after COVID with our B&B panel, the best and brightest from LibertyNation.com. Leesa K. Dunner, Mark Angelides, and Scott Cosenza. America received much of its information during the pandemic directly from President Trump, but it was then repackaged and filtered through the media. And as always, the media had the greatest impact on how people viewed the pandemic and the response to it. Mark, how would you characterize the coverage of the pandemic by the major media?
I guess I'd say it was a dream come true for them. They were awarded the unique opportunity to become the true gatekeepers of what is valid and what is not, what is acceptable, what controls the Overton window. I mean, we all know the newsroom adage, if it bleeds, it leads. And that's been every single day for the media newsrooms across the country since the pandemic began. They've had COVID deaths, COVID scares, different daily numbers. Trump kills millions. Don't forget that one. It's been really dynamite for them.
He wants you to ingest bleach or...
No, not ingest, to inject it directly into your bloodstream.
Don't forget that.
Yeah, I'd please, anybody who actually has a video recording of that, send it in.
Well, that sounds about as accurate as very fine people on
It'll
both
just
sides.
be banned on one of the platforms.
Yeah, it allowed them to become the gatekeepers against the president of the United States. I mean, that is such a unique, unprecedented opportunity. I mean, we hear all the time, and we can read throughout history of the media gets suppressed by the evil dictatorial government. You know, it's the stuff of books, it's novels, it's Pulitzer Prize winning stuff. But here's the reverse. The president is silenced by the media. This is the Fourth Estate's epic moment in time. That they love it. They love it so much that they can write the news. They can do it without being held to account, beyond question. Because I mean, let's be fair. It's four companies that control the 9 major media groups within the country, and this for them it's fantastic. So that's how I would describe the coverage of the pandemic by major media, as in it's their dream come true, the authoritarian dream come true.
So Scott, the most noticeable thing about the media during the pandemic was their constant devaluation of whatever Donald Trump was saying about it. Do you think Americans were able to make informed decisions during the pandemic, or was the real news filtered beyond recognition?
Well, before I answer that, let me just say that Mark is so right. We had with Jim Acosta, he physically assaulted somebody in the White House. Now, it was a simple assault. I'm not suggesting it was a felonious assault, but it was a simple assault. And the White House disinvited him to continue attending press events on the property where the president lives with his family, and it was overturned by a court who said they had to let Jim Acosta on the property. That's so it was their dream come true. And to answer your question, Tim,
let me just say that's a good one to bring up. I think a lot of people forgot about that.
Yes.
Thank you, Leesa. The Americans could get real news if their news was for stories that didn't implicate the Trump administration, or it had a negative implication against the Trump administration. There are plenty of true stories that negatively implicated Donald Trump or his administration. Those you can believe. But if anything had a slightly could be positive, like Donald Trump maybe said, you should take vitamin D before Fauci did. All of a sudden, we can't believe it. We can never believe it because Trump said it first. So anything like that, I think that they got bad information from, and it's because
Donald Trump supports vampires.
Well, but this is what got them in trouble with the origin of COVID. You know, he said it started in a Chinese lab. Now, if it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck.
Kamala Harris said that she wouldn't take any vaccine that was approved by President Trump, for heaven's sake.
Yeah, I remember that.
This is all wrapped up in a bow of a legacy or big box media that just benefits from the unearned credibility that basically the previous generations that inhabited those chairs do. I saw this YouTube video by somebody who features international banking that is kind of interesting about how Americans are treated with different banking services around the world. And his video was about he canceled his Swiss bank account. And he was saying, you go into these situations and you feel like you're going to be dealing with like some 7th generation banker speaking elegant French in a perfect suit. He's like, no, you're dealing with some 26-year-old Polish girl who's kind of, slightly annoyed by your interacting with her. But because of the reputational aspect of it, you think, oh, Swiss banking, it must be so elegant and fancy. No. And the same thing is true for these legacy media. Oh, it's the such and such. They must have this higher standard. Absolutely not. And in fact, it's a lower standard.
So, Leesa, it sure seemed like the media was doing everything to take Trump down, using the pandemic as the ultimate pretext. Going forward, has the media's sagging credibility been helped or hurt by their coverage of COVID?
Well, it's interesting. I did a little research for your listeners and found that a Morning Consult poll conducted in May showed that 66% of Democrats and 36% of Republicans said the 9 leading U.S. media outlets are at least somewhat credible. Now, interestingly, Fox saw an 8-point decline in credibility among Republicans since last year. That's more than any other outlet. CNN's Anderson Cooper had the highest favorability rating of any primetime host among Democrats, 66%. And I'm going to ask you guys, who do you think topped Fox's?
Tucker Carlson.
Exactly, at 47%. Ding, ding, ding.
It's an easy one. It's an easy one.
You win the Funkin' Wagnalls mayonnaise jar. Bravo.
Yeah, well,
I'll take it.
And the 5 came in second, even though those 5 aren't as good as us 4. Okay, let's get some final thoughts from each of you on America after the pandemic. Mark, you first.
Irreparable cultural damage. I think that sums it up. Rights have been taken away. And once they've been taken away once, they can do it so much easier the next time, especially since there was really hardly any pushback. What with it was a government, a big business, a big tech, and of course the Fourth Estate, all pushing for the debasement of rights.
Scott, final thoughts.
Tim, I'm going to class up the show by quoting Tocqueville.
Thank you.
And he said that we could keep our freedoms as long as we could refrain from voting ourselves each other's possessions. And I think that that's where we are, especially with the pandemic, with the notion that we're one step closer to just the government supporting everybody all the time. We're going to have to see if our fellow Americans have what it takes to kind of build a future where those liberties are not as easily infringed upon in the future. And that's, of course, why we get up in the morning and go to work at LibertyNation.com.
Okay, thanks to our panel, Mark Angelides, Leesa K. Donner, and Scott Cosenza. And we hope we provided, if not enlightenment, at least food for thought on the state of the nation after COVID. This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, all available on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we will be back at you next week. Same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.